Hey, well, hello, my students. And here we are already at Learning Plan 3, which is doing work in teams. Prior to this time, we've pretty much been talking about teams and what to expect and how to organize your work and how to focus on the accomplishment of your goals and being in alignment with the organizational charter and goals. But now we're talking specifically about team techniques. And this gets kind of personal as we get more into it. So, once again, the way I look at these chapters is I kind of, do a 150 yards back. I kind of view it. And I look at the headers and I look at the call out sections. And I thought this one was cool. This is called the 100-mile rule. Once a meeting begins, everyone is expected to give in their full attention. Yeah, and no one should be called from the meeting unless it's so important that the interruption would occur, even if the meeting was 100 miles away from the workplace. The 100-mile rule will need to be communicated to those who take phone messages or who would interrupt the team's work for other reasons. If you're going to be on that team, no interruptions. Oh, well, I think my dog is sick. I don't know, maybe, and maybe that merits being away from your meeting. But these are really important. Commitment is a commitment. And the better you are at committing like that, the better your team will be, and the more appreciation you'll receive from your teammates and cooperation. Okay, and then it gets into you're using agendas and how agendas work. You'll notice that I put in the before in Blackboard, before the learning plans, I put some resources up there. They are um, a template for the agenda, a template for meeting minutes, and there's a template for charter creation. But you just want you to know, and I wrote that in there, you don't have to use those forms. I don't particularly like them because they kind of constrain me to their way of processing information. I like to process my own way. So I typically make some kind of a table in Word, and as I put in the elements, maybe the time, what the topic is, and what the information is that I want to share. And maybe the fourth column is who's responsible, because I always like to be able to track that so that we keep the momentum going week after week after week. Oh, Jane was responsible for this. Jane, what's your update? Well, I didn't get a chance to do it. That's a problem. All right. So then we get into the agendas. How is it going? Start on time. Then there's a team meeting agenda worksheet, which, I mean, that's not exactly the way they did it in their template, but I like it. I mean, I think it kind of works. Fill in key meeting rules. Um, they they um, they have several meeting roles that they call out there, and then they've got the next thing they've got is a template on meeting minutes. Mm, I don't care for theirs. I'd rather have more free flowing than specific little boxes for topics. That's my that's my word on that. And then it gets into the timekeeper's roles, and it gets into what does the scribe do, and then it gets into improving meeting processes, and then it gets into team meeting evaluations. Um, in the old curriculum that I used to have for this course, we had team meeting evaluations for facilitators, but I took it out. And the reason why is because a team working at work and you're dealing with relatively different people from across the company. you might want to get feedback from them about your facilitation skills. But in a class like this, unless you're really bad, nobody ever throws their teammates under the bus. They'll always say something positive like, well, we strayed off the topic a little bit, but she was able to pull us back. I mean, and what am I going to do? And I don't want to evaluate your facilitation report. Your facilitation report is feedback for you. And if you want it, fine. If you don't want it, that's fine too. But I took it out because there was of no useful value in our curriculum for this class. All right. Next comes guidelines for effective meetings. I like these, preparing for discussion, listening, asking for clarifications. They're all described in there. And then, discussion phases, the exploratory phase, the narrowing phase. It's like a funnel. It comes down to a focal point, and then we have to sort of manage that because if somebody comes in with a thought that's out here somewhere, that needs to stay over to the side so that we can stay in this trough, unless it's of such importance that we completely missed it and we need to bring it in, stop and start over. All right. Then it gets into brainstorming. Um, some of they have different brainstorming techniques that are outlined on page 13, kind of like nominal groups and list ideas and processes. And um, it's, I think it's all interesting. I think this uh, nominal group techniques, then they term those NGT, nominal group. The nominal group technique is a structured method of generating a list and then narrowing it down. First phase is silent brainstorming, and in the second phase, members vote to reduce the list. So what you're seeing here is this deductive thinking. It's a little bit like playing, back when we were kids, 20 questions is bigger than a bread box. Is it animal, vegetable, mineral? Is it living? Is it organic? And as you get closer down here, you're lapping off major chunks of stuff so that you get right to the focus of it, which I think that makes great sense. All right. Then it talks about that process of zeroing in. And then it talks about how you kind of keep track of that. And some of them people use a flip chart. Uh, I'm a big visual fan. You'll probably notice that behind me I have my whiteboard, and I draw on this all the time. And I really like it because it allows me to visualize in a simple form, maybe a complex topic, but it also allows you to be able to see it and discuss it with me. All right. Voting, eliminating those things with low. It's an interesting chart here on page 22, 3-22, chapter 3, page 22. It is the effort and impact grid. I like it because what it does is it talks about high effort, low impact, high impact. I like it. I like it because it gives you a chance to see where's the low hanging fruit and how can we get at it. I think those are really important. And if something is a lot of effort and it's not going to have much of an impact, we may want to put that in phase 2 or phase 3 or not do it at all. But that gives you an opportunity to make decisions, good strategic decisions about what you're going to do. All right. Then it gets into guidelines for effective decisions. So we went from sort of analyzing the problem and going through the analysis all the way down through this process in chapter 3 until we get to decision making. Who should be involved? The context of decision making, clarify, understand, learn, gather. decide how to decide. It's interesting, and I think this is on page 26, 3-26. This one is decision making, when to use each method, because not every decision requires consensus. And I want you to know the difference. Consensus, voting, subgroups, one person. Okay, and then how that all works out. Decide how to decide, and then it's talking about what is consensus. Is consensus unanimous? It's not. All right. Tips for successful consensus. These are all really good techniques. It now moves to, it talks a little bit about guidelines for effective record keeping, but then it gets into the storyboard. And I am a really big fan of the storyboard. The storyboard pulls us back, because we've been very focused now, pulls us back and tells the story. What did we see? What did the data produce? Who's doing what now? Who's failed at it? Who's succeeded at it? What are the challenges? What are the potential risks? What are the successes? What's the investment going to be? And when do we break even? I mean, these are all topics that say, I see what you have done here and I applaud it. I love it. It's a storyboard. And they talk about storyboard processing starting on page 31. They get into talking about the project timeline. It's kind of a Gantt chart. If you know anything about project management, Gantt charts are super useful. Then it talks about creating a plan and some of the things that you have to do to create the plan. Then it has a planning grid on page 37, which I really like. Now, I don't know if you've had any experience with a Gantt chart, but I'm going to give you the quick study of what a Gantt chart is and does. All right. So typically, a project like this starts with the end goal. So let's say, and so what you have here is you have a list of tasks. And then what you have down here is the calendar. These might be weeks, and this one might be your wedding. One way or the other, this is going to take place. And there are lots of tasks that have to be done. Now, you're going to switch around these tasks to look at them, but what happens is that because these are grids based on the calendar and because they're divided by tasks, you can actually say this task starts here and finishes here. This task it kind of starts here and finishes there. This task starts here and doesn't finish till there. This task doesn't start to here, but it's short. This task starts about here and goes to here. This task starts there. And you can see what this is doing is if today happens to be the latter part of, the 28th of May, you can see if this is May, you can see at this point what we have done, what's still in the process, and what do we have yet to do. The importance of this is that it keeps people accountable and keeps them on track. Now, there are variations of this planning grid up here, but you can see you can actually put people's names on here. Now, I've seen Gantt charts where they actually put budget stuff on there as well. How much is the budget for the cake? How long do they need for the cake to be made and ordered and delivered? Who's involved with that decision? And so it's a planning sheet, it's a planning grid. very, very important and essential. All right, then it gets into tree diagrams, and there's a Gantt chart. There's a picture of the Gantt chart on 40. Um, then it gets into team leaders putting it all together, initial team meetings, reviewing the charter, clarifying roles, planning a draft, on and on and on, building the relationships, and getting right down to uh, working the scientific method. Because what we don't want to do is we don't want this to just be subjective. It needs to have that clarity of thought that says, this is what we need to be thinking about, and keep that clear, because it's easy, especially in a team where somebody says, that's stupid. Maybe it is to that person, but you've got to be scientifically tuned in on this. So it talks about that stuff. I kind of like this page 50 in chapter 3, the first team meeting. Why are we here? Conduct the first meeting. There is our first meeting, a template. Of course, you've already had your first meeting, but it's kind of cool to see this. So here's an agenda for your first team meeting, guidelines for monitoring progress, a checklist. There's a model for team progress, then team presentations, visual tips, storyboarding, guidelines for closing the project. You see, that's all in here about doing work in teams. I would say from a robust learning perspective, there's more in chapter 3 than in any other learning plan. It's a big deal. And that's partly why they put it in the center as opposed to putting it in the beginning, because people would drop the class. I don't know if they would or not, but anyway, we got you going anyway, and thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.